So the question is, how do I select Azure VMSize in a real work environment? When selecting an Azure VMSize, you should gather information about cost, legal and compliance, CPU, memory, storage needs, network bandwidth, and workload type. Although all of these factors matter, the process almost always begins with understanding the workload. The workload determines the performance profile, which then drives the VM size selection. Here is how Azure VM size are selected in a real work environment. If the workload is a public software, then we need to check the vendor's documentation for system requirements. For commercial or third-party applications, the vendor typically provides recommended Azure VM size or minimum specification for CPU, memory, storage type, and sometimes network throughput. These requirements form the baseline for selecting the appropriate Azure VM size. If the workload is an existing internally developed application, we can check the current VM running the workload for the VM configurations and the performance metrics to come up with the right VM size. If the workload is a new internally developed application, we can check with the developers for expected CPU, memory, and storage requirements. And we can also ask the expected number of users or transactions to validate that the requested resources are realistic and aligned with the projected load. Now that we understand the workload, the next step is to select Azure VM size. If the workloads are small to medium databases and low to medium traffic web servers require balanced CPU to memory ratio, then we should select the general purpose Azure VM size. If the workloads are medium traffic web servers, network appliances, batch processes, and application servers require high CPU to memory ratio, then we should select the compute optimized Azure VM size. If the workloads are relational database servers, medium to large caches, and in-memory analytics require high memory to CPU ratio, then we should select the memory optimized Azure VM size. If the workload requires high disk throughput and I/O, then we should select the storage optimized Azure VM size. If the workload requires heavy graphics rendering and video editing, then we should select the GPU Azure VM size. And finally, if the workload requires fastest and most powerful CPU, then we should select the high performance compute Azure VM size. Now we know which Azure VM size selected for the workload. The next step is to figure out which Azure region the VM will be deployed. If the VM is deployed in a new Azure region, we need to check with the security and legal departments to make sure the new Azure region is in compliance with the company's industry. Finally, we need to make sure the VM size is available in the selected Azure region. The last step is to provide the estimated cost to the requester. To do that, in the browser, we type in Azure Pricing Calculator. Then we open the Pricing Calculator website. Then we click on the virtual machine to add to estimate. Now we can click view to view the estimate. Here we need to make sure that we select the correct region. In this case is US and the operating system is Windows. Now we can select the correct VM size, and in this case we select the VM size is D4SV3. Then we select it and we can figure out the monthly cost is $274.48 per month, and we need to provide this to the requester to make sure they approve before we deploy the VM.